and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. My name's Lindsay and I am back with more Durst videos. I'm ploughing through them, and sorry, but this is going to be another long one. We have one quick witness before we start on with Douglas Durst. So this next witness is Robert Curtis, and he is a retired peace officer from the Beverly Hills PD. And then after he retired, he went to Bell Gardens for almost a year as an interim chief of police. In the year 2000, he was a police captain, and he thinks he was in the field operations division at the time. He is asked if he is familiar with a woman named Rhea Ioannidis, which he is, and he says she was an administration clerk in the police department and was serving as sort of a secretary for the captain, so she was one of his secretaries. On the 27th of December 2000, Rhea brought him an envelope and a letter and showed it to him. He remembers it because it was unusual. I think we know where this is going. It was addressed only to the police department with no address on it, and the content inside was quite short and very unusual. He also remembers that Beverly was spelled wrong. He also remembers that the content of the letter, obviously, it was the cadaver note with the address and the word cadaver. As far as he can recall, he can't remember any other time where he received any letter that had the word cadaver on it. He contacted the detective division, and Detective Craig Stevens responded, and he passed on the letter to him. Robert also told him that he should contact his supervisors and the LAPD, as the address on the note was in that jurisdiction. Detective Craig Stevens is no longer alive, so they can't speak to him. Cross-examination, he agrees that certainly to send a letter like that and say cadaver at certain location, that would indicate that the person who sent it wasn't hiding it, but he can't speculate on the person's motives or what was in their mind. So there we go. Right, let's move on to Mr. Douglas Durst. So obviously he would rather not be there. It's difficult for him, and he's another one that had to be subpoenaed. So Bob was bought out of the family business in 2006, and this amounted to tens of millions of dollars. He became the trustee of the family organisation after his father Seymour died in 1995. Obviously, the plan was for Bob to take over, which didn't happen. Douglas says about he and Bob's relationship that it was where they could talk to each other, but it was very strained, and growing up, Bob treated him miserably. Bob would embarrass him at every opportunity, fight him at every chance, and it was very difficult. He treated his other siblings just as bad. Douglas would cry in front of Bob, and Bob would ridicule him for it. Currently, he doesn't have any relationship with Bob, and the last Douglas saw him was in 2001 at his wedding in Texas, just before he found out Morris Black had been killed. They didn't talk at the wedding, they were just in the same place. It wasn't, I don't think it was Bob's wedding, I think it was a family member's wedding. The last time they actually spoke was in 1999, and the final straw when they ceased all communication was in 1994 when Douglas took over the family business. He says Bob isn't a very generous person, and he's very tight with his money and spent as little as possible. This is based on his first-hand knowledge of how cheap he is and things that he has done to try and save money. He was never aware of Bob giving his friends large sums of money or anyone any money. Douglas is now asked about Seymour, his father, and he says that he was a wonderful father. Now, previous to this, because we've only, heard things from Bob about his father, that, we had a different view of Seymour, that he wasn't very nice. But according to Douglas, he was a wonderful father. He says he had a strict moral code, but wasn't strict in the sense of punishment. And when asked if Seymour was strict with Bob, Douglas says Seymour wasn't strict with Bob at all. In fact, he was the opposite with Bob. Douglas has seen parts of the movie All Good Things, and he says the portrayal of Seymour was completely inaccurate, and it's completely untrue that Seymour forced Bob to work in the family organisation. Seymour never asked any of them to do something they didn't want to do. So Bob saying his father made him watch his mother falling or jumping from the roof is untrue. He says there was nowhere in that house that Bob could have seen where their mother fell or jumped from. So on to Kathy, and Douglas would describe Kathy as a lovely person. He had a very good relationship with her. He says the whole family was happy about Bob and Kathy, and they all accepted her. He didn't know about them getting married. Although Douglas and his wife and kids and Bobby and Kathy did share a house in Katona for a couple of years, from 1970 to 1973. During this period of time, Douglas had a good relationship with Kathy, and he would say that Bob and Kathy had a good relationship. He never saw any violence or emotional abuse. In 1974, Bob and Kathy moved out of this house when he got the house in South Salem. Douglas has never heard that the Durst connection to the medical school benefited Kathy being accepted there. Douglas would visit Bob and Kathy at the South Salem house, but over time it started to become very uncomfortable visiting them, so these visits became less and less. He says there was a lot of tension. He knows who Peter Schwartz is, but read about what happened in the paper. Douglas never discussed it with Bob. Remember, Peter Schwartz is the guy that Bob kicked in the head. Now he is asked if Kathy ever told him about Bob stealing from the Durst organisation, which she did, and this was around Christmas time in 1980. Near January 1982, he knew that Kathy was seeking a divorce, and he has no reason to believe that his dad would say that he didn't want them to get a divorce, as there have been a number of divorces in the family, and divorces wouldn't affect the family trust. He found out that Kathy was missing when Bob called him to tell him. He thinks it was around the 3rd of February. He says that there was no great anxiety coming from Bob when he called, and it did seem a little strange. He has no knowledge of what happened to Kathy, nor did he have anything to do with it, nor did his father. He and his father didn't help to try and cover anything up. Bob also mentioned Kathy using cocaine, but Douglas never saw it, and he told them that he had put Kathy on a train and never saw her again. When Kathy went missing, Bob never came to Douglas to ask for help. After Kathy went missing, he was contacted by Kathy's friends. Didn't know this. He was contacted by Kathy's friends and family asking for access to the South Salem house. He agreed to let them into the house, and he broke into the house. He forced the door open, and he agreed with them that he would give them a certain amount of time, then he would have to report a burglary. And he says his motivation for doing this was that they were quite desperate, and he wanted to show them that either nothing happened or there was evidence that something had happened. Douglas did report a burglary, and law enforcement came out and took a report from him. Douglas was concerned about Bob finding out about this and his involvement with law enforcement, because when Bob gets angry, he gets extremely angry. So, God, I thought it was just Gilberta that had broke in, but didn't know he'd done it. At work, Douglas ended up putting a this is disgusting. Douglas ended up putting a camera in his office because he had evidence that Bob was going into his office and going through his papers, and someone had been urinating in his waste paper basket, and he was able to confirm that Bob was entering his office. Gross. Douglas was afraid of his brother because he kept a very large wrench with a sharp point on his desk, which he thinks could be considered a weapon. But to be clear, Bob had never threatened him with it. When Douglas took over, Bob left, but no one knew he was leaving at the time. So Susan, Douglas met Susan once or twice, and he was aware of how close she and Bob were. When Susan became Bob's spokesperson, this didn't have anything to do with the Durst organisation. That was purely between her and Bob. He heard Susan had been murdered from the news, and he has never spoken to Bob about it. He found out about the Kathy reinvestigation through an old PR consultant that used to work for them. There was a meeting with Douglas, Wendy, and Bob where they discussed it, and Bob was very upset. So we go back to when Bob was bought out of the company and how bad all the legal stuff was when going through all that. And Douglas is then asked if he knows how Bob feels about him to this day, and Douglas says that he would like to murder him. Next, Douglas is then asked about the time Bob jumped bail in Galveston and he was on the run. Did he become aware that Bob had shown up at his home in Katona? Which Douglas replies, yes, he did. And based on prior information he had about jail calls and Bob threatening his life, he had a lot of fear for him and his family's safety. Due to this, Douglas had private security. Don't blame him. And when he found out Bob had shown up at his house, he was obviously concerned. And obviously, the other times in the Jinx when they were filming, you can see Bob showing up outside the Durst organisation building and one of Douglas's homes. There was also another time in 2008 when Bob showed up again at his house, where Bob actually got onto the property, and Douglas and his family were then moved to a safe location. A few days after Bob showed up again, Douglas's response to this was, again, he was very concerned as his kids were at home. He still has security to this day and even came to court with security due to the threats Bob has made and the means he has to follow through. And how many other people have said that they were petrified to be in court to testify against Bob? And this is his own brother, and I don't think anyone knows Bob better than Douglas. In 2012, he had contact with the FBI due to Bob's actions and then wanting to know if there could be anything done to protect Douglas and his family. It's all been very embarrassing for him as he is more of a private person, and it's been painful for them to have their name associated with all of this. But despite all this, it's still difficult for him to be in court testifying against his own brother. He does, in fact, feel sorry for him. So the cross-examination. Janine Pirro even accused Douglas of having something to do with Kathy's disappearance, and Douglas was concerned with the reinvestigation because he was worried that Bob would be indicted without any evidence and that the Durst name would be dragged through the mud. When Bob was on the run from Galveston, the Durst organisation hired a criminal lawyer and urged Bob to hand himself in. They also employed other lawyers to watch the Galveston trial when that was going on. DeGuerin says to Douglas that Bob was proud of Kathy being in medical school, and Douglas responds with, I had no knowledge of that, so that just shut DeGuerin down straight away. He has no knowledge either if Kathy used the Durst name to get into college, and he wasn't aware of some of the struggles Kathy was having in medical school. So, try as the defence might, they're not getting anything out of Douglas with regards to Kathy and her medical school and her using the Durst name to be accepted. The last time Douglas saw Kathy was Christmas of 1981. So when Kathy and Bob lived with Douglas, he was concerned about their drug use, and this was the reason Kathy and Bob moved out. So now when Bob told Douglas about Kathy, he says Bob did sound distraught. He has no knowledge whether Seymour helped when Kathy disappeared, but DeGuerin asked him if he told Mr. Lewin that Seymour made every effort to try and find Kathy, which Douglas doesn't recall. He also told Mr. Lewin that Bob had said that Kathy's disappearance could have something to do with drugs, as a drug dealer had been to the apartment. There's a lawsuit pending right now that accuses the Durst organisation, including Seymour, of colluding to cover up Kathy's disappearance, which Douglas finds insulting. But Seymour felt responsibility about how Bob was and how he has behaved and the issues he had. Seymour would not have protected Bob if he thought he was guilty. So Douglas disputes that Seymour made Bob give up the health food store he and Kathy had, where, you know, he says they were happy to come back to the city to work in the organisation. Douglas believes the reason Bob came back was because the store failed. So that in the movie All Good Things, it portrays Seymour going to that health food store that they had together and forcing Bob to come back to work in the city. Douglas made an effort to stop the production of the movie All Good Things, and part of the reason was because he wanted to protect the family name. He also tried to limit what was put into the Jinx, which, you know, you can't fault him for that. The redirect. So Dick Guerin in his Cross went through money gifts that we've heard about with the car and the holiday. So now Mr. Lewin begins with asking him if Douglas remembers saying that Bob would not give gifts without an ulterior motive, meaning he would want something in return. And Mr. Lewin quite rightly points out that helping Bob cover up the killing of his wife would be an ulterior motive, and Douglas agrees. And he also thinks Bob buying the Lexus for his attorney and his wife would also be an ulterior motive. So totally voids out, you know, Bob being generous out of the kindness of his heart to repay anything. You know, he's buying allegiance and he's buying silence. So there we go. Sorry, it's another long one, but needs must. I'll be back with more videos. You know I will be. So until then, bye for now.